In this video, I'm going to go through 3 of the mistakes that I made when I was learning Spanish and starting to speak Spanish. If you don't know me, my name is Hamid. I'm 16 and fluent in 4 languages, including Spanish. I got fluent in Spanish at 13 with 120 hours of studying. And now I help obsessed Spanish learners like yourself get conversationally fluent in Spanish with my simple method. Here's my transformation.
Podré para mejorar mi español cuando no tengo mucho tiempo libre para estudiar español.
Which was after the 120 hours. And this is Alvarez's results.
Quiero aprender español. Pues para mí
Sí.
me gusta jugar el click para aprender español, así que ya lo sé la palabra click.
So I'm not going to waste your time in this video. Here are the 3 mistakes on screen, and we're going to go through each of them. So the first is vowels, okay? Quick note before we dive in, I put a free gift in the description for you to instantly unlock thousands of Spanish words, and you don't need to put it in email or anything, you just get it instantly. And for those who want to go even deeper, there's also a link to my program where I teach Spanish, and I'll talk about those later. So let's dive in. So vowels are letters, basically, in the language where when we're speaking it makes 99% of the difference from when we're speaking, okay? So I remember when I was first learning, I did something called language transfer, and the first lesson that he went through there was about vowels and how that's how you get the perfect Spanish accent. So vowels are letters like A or A, E or for E, I, U, and O. Okay, so these are the vowels in Spanish. So vowels are basically these open mouth sounds. They're these sounds that are the structure of sentences, okay? Your Spanish is determined, your accent, your pronunciation, is determined by how well you hit these vowels. So let me give an example. The word to find is encontrar. Now, the bones of that word is the vowels. So we have E, O, A, encontrar. Now, if you pronounce these vowels like in English, so the vowels in English are A, E, I, U, O. Okay, A, E, I, U, O. Well, if you pronounce them here, well then, listen to how it's going to sound like. Encontrar. Very American, very gringo, no? And so, instead we want to pronounce like in Spanish, which is A, E, I, U, O. So, E, O, A. And now put the consonants in. Encontrar. Encontrar. And you hear how much more Spanishy that becomes. And so the biggest mistake that not only I saw myself making, but also others making around me when we were both learning Spanish, and now I see many people making, is just not prioritizing the vowels. When you try to speak Spanish too quickly, the problem happens where you speak Spanish that isn't great, which is fine in the beginning. Now, when I was learning Spanish, I was speaking Spanish from day one. When I was teaching my client Eduardo, and he got fluent in 4 months, I also told him to speak Spanish from day one, because we need to be speaking to get better at speaking, right? Very simple. But the problem arises where people start making mistakes, and these are just the simple mistakes that basically what I saw in myself and I've seen in other clients that I've coached, that these are the mistakes that they make. And the first one is just vowels, okay? Now, the easiest way to sort of unlock these, especially if you're I see a lot of people who don't sort of speak Spanish a lot, and they're American, so they are very used to the American way of pronouncing them. Now, the best way to pronounce these vowels is to just imagine it as a laugh. That's the way I like to imagine. So think of A, right? Spanish is A. Imagine ha 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 ha, and then get rid of the H. Ah. Think about E, right? This is the way I like to think about it. E is in Spanish. So think of he, and get rid of the H. Right? And you can apply this for the rest of it. He, ho, right? Another way to apply these is that, and I don't see anyone else talking about this, is that the vowels in Spanish are almost like the beginning parts of the vowels in English. So we have O, right? O, we pronounce it like O, like with a U. That's a U, right? O. But Spanish, it just has this O. It's not O, it's just O, right? So it's the beginning parts of them. This doesn't apply to every single one, but it applies to a lot of them. Another one is that the E's and I's are switched. So in English, E, like this E sound, is in Spanish, E is how you pronounce the I, okay? And E is how, and for E, it's eh. Kind of like in the word everything. Every, right? Eh. U is U. So think about a word that starts with U, right? There's this guy named Ulama, right? Ooh. So basically, as soon as you're able to pronounce these, start implementing it into sentences and words. So the word for normal in Spanish is the exact same in English. But now that you know how these letters are sound, try to say this in Spanish. So it's not normal, but it's so it's normal. And do you see how Spanishy that sounds now? So that's the first one. Now let's talk about obsessing over speed instead of the conversation. Now this is very important. This is something that I did myself and I see other people doing, and it's vital. So here let's cover what fluency is, okay? So I remember when I first thought about what fluency was, I was on YouTube, I was doing research, and I was in the position that you're probably in right now, where I was doing tons of research on all of the different ways to learn Spanish. I went on like this app hunt. I did tested out tons of apps, and if something didn't work, I would just move on to the next app. Repeat, right? Scrolling on YouTube, and I'll get tons of these different YouTubers teaching me Spanish. And many of them had made videos about what fluency was, okay? And eventually I'd come to my own definition, which I want to share with you now. So I recognize that fluency had one very simple definition, which was in the Oxford Dictionary, it's like as being fluent. And being fluent is just having fluidity when you speak. So it's basically a constant flow of words out of your mouth, right? Kind of like when you build a sentence now, you get that constant flow, okay? That's what the dictionary definition of fluency is. However, this is usually meant as being able to speak effortlessly, quickly, and articulately. But this isn't accurate in relation to what most people think that fluency is. Because if I can speak fast, that doesn't necessitate that I can have conversations. And this is why I clarify that I help obsessed Spanish learners reach conversational fluency. After that summer, when you heard my transformation, my Spanish wasn't super fast or like fluent, right? When we say fluent in that sense, we're talking about effortlessly, articulately, right? But we never really cared about that. Obviously, it's nice to be able to just blurt out words. But at least for me, the thing I wanted most was conversations between natives. I wanted to connect with natives. I wanted to be able to walk into like a coffee shop or, walk into like a grocery store. And if I saw a Spanish person, I was able to speak Spanish with them. If a new person joined my class who spoke Spanish, I wanted to be able to speak Spanish with them. I want to speak Spanish with my Spanish teacher. And so for me to achieve that, it didn't necessitate the same definition of fluency that has been put on us, right? And so the best way to define fluency, in my opinion, is to separate it into two categories, okay? So conversational fluency and native fluency. And the goal of this whole channel, the things that I'm teaching you, is to achieve conversational fluency. Conversational fluency is being able to have a conversation in Spanish where both parties understand each other to the point where they can have a full conversation. Here is the sauce. The fluidity, is in the conversation, not only in your speech, okay? And so the goal is conversational fluency, not native fluency. Native fluency is like the long-term goal that takes years to achieve. I achieved conversational fluency in 120 hours. Native fluency is literally something that I'm still working on, okay? And so there's something I call the effort discrepancy, where you get most results from Spanish from conversational fluency, which takes you the least amount of effort compared to native fluency. So the goal should first be conversational fluency. That is when you're able to walk into a store, speak Spanish with people, walk out. That's when you're able to go to randomly meet someone who speaks Spanish on Omegle, impress them with your Spanish, and then leave, right? Because the reason why it's impressive is because it requires less effort and time. And thus, when you tell them it took you a few months, they're surprised because you're able to communicate much better. And this is what my client Eduardo, for example, experienced. And so, going back to this mistake of obsessing over speed instead of the conversation, if you just want to be able to memorize a sentence and just blurt it out, right? Just to be able to blah, blah, blah your way through a conversation, you aren't gonna be fluent necessarily, right? Because here's the thing, right? Have you ever had someone who said that they're fluent in a language? You ask them to speak in it. They say, my name is blank and I like blank. And then you ask them to, elaborate, and then they just aren't able to do it, right? They're not fluent. They just memorize a few things. So this is what happens when people obsess over speed. And one of the biggest mistakes I made was, in the beginning, I was obsessing over just speaking, over just getting words out of my mouth, right? Which is good, okay? Fundamentally, it is good, okay? However, you get better at something by not just doing more, but by doing better, right? It's by doing stuff and then correcting the mistakes that we made along the way. And that is how we get better fundamentally, right? You don't just get better by doing the same thing over and over again. You get better by doing it, finding the mistakes that you made and correcting them, which is thankfully why you're watching this video, hopefully, right? And so this idea of obsessing over speed, the way we solve it is to put the goal as conversational fluency. Basically, obsessing over conversations rather than speed. Because conversations is where most of the results are when it comes to Spanish. Okay? So what this means in terms of studying, it means when we're trying to learn Spanish, we shouldn't necessarily put our focus into the stuff that gives us speed, but the stuff that gives us conversations. And this is where we talk about what I like to call the fluency equation, and I'll quickly run through with you. Conversational fluency looks like this when it comes to a formula. In a conversation, there are only two skills that are being used, speaking and understanding. So let's clarify. In a conversation, I'm speaking, then you're understanding me. And then we switch. You're speaking and I'm understanding you. Only two skills that are being used there, isn't it? And so what this means is, if we want to get better at conversations, we need to prioritize the fluency equation. And the best way to prioritize the fluency equation is to obviously practice speaking and understanding. We'll clarify this a little more. It's speaking real Spanish, obviously, because conversations is between real natives. And so we want to learn, when we're speaking Spanish, we want to speak like a native. And we want to understand and listen to audible Spanish that is actual native content. Okay? This is why a lot of people on the internet really don't like me, because I say that, for example, dreaming Spanish isn't like a super good way of learning. The reason simply is because they speak slow Spanish, and slow Spanish is not real Spanish. You probably know that, right? And so that gives us real Spanish fluency, right? Conversations with natives. If you want to have conversations between people who speak slowly, then you probably don't need to learn fast Spanish. But you probably don't want to learn Spanish and speak with people who speak slowly. You want to speak with natives. So we want to obviously do that. And to put it into more of a detail, and to put more details, Spanish sentences can be simplified into just grammar and vocabulary. So this leads me to my next point, which is trying to skip grammar. Okay, this is a big one, okay? I see a lot of people, and I did this myself, where this is one of the most rookie mistakes that I made. A lot of programs, when I was doing my research, I'll tell you a quick story actually. When I was learning Spanish, the whole motivation and reason to learn Spanish was around the beginning of 2022 or so. There was this guy in my class who started using Duolingo Plus, and I was a nerd, okay? I had really good grades, like the equivalent of a 4.0 GPA in America. Obviously, I was young, we don't have a GPA, but you get the point, right? I had really good grades, and so I was a nerd. So I wanted to get the best grades in the class. And Spanish, I had a B in Spanish, right? And this guy, who wasn't necessarily an A student, he was kind of popular, everyone knew him, of course. And he had gotten an A in Spanish, and I had gotten a B. And I was like, what the hell? So the thing he had been doing was Duolingo Plus. And so what had happened was people started looking at him, and then almost became a trend in the class to start studying languages using like these apps. And so me being the person I was, I tried finding the best way to learn Spanish because I wanted to get the best grades. But it wasn't just about Spanish at that point. It was also just about fun, because obviously learning Spanish has its own fun to it. And so I did Duolingo for a while, and I found many different methods online, okay? And what I'd seen here and there was this phase of trying to skip grammar, kind of like with Duolingo, and this is also a big problem with Duolingo, is that they just go through vocab first, only vocab. You've probably seen those vocab memorization sets where they memorize vocab. And this whole idea of just trying to skip grammar, a part of the fluency equation is grammar. So let's talk about this, okay? So grammar is a vital part of the fluency equation. And the way I like to think about it is the 3 W's, okay? So I wanted to talk about the leverage you have when you have grammar. Okay, so grammar is basically how we structure sentences. So let's talk about this. We have the words themselves. So in any sentence, there are words in Spanish, right? And that's the what. So that's what I like to call the first W. Then we have the where. That's where the words are placed. So we have ¿cómo estás? How are you? Those words are the what. So we have the word como and the word estás. Then we know that the word como comes first and the word estás comes after. And so we have the what and the where. And so here's the thing with not studying grammar. The juice of the grammar, the part that gives you leverage, is what I like to call the third W, which is why, okay? Here's just an example I'll give you, okay? What I like to call is the cognate cheat code, okay? And this is really going to show you this example of why, okay? When you learn grammar and you understand the why, not when you just learn grammar generally, right? There's the memorizing grammar. There's the memorizing the different phrases. Top 5 must-know phrases in Spanish. It's like, that's when you memorize the what and the where, not when you understand the why. So let's talk about the why. The word for presentation in Spanish is presentación. And so if I taught you just that, then you've only learned one word. You've learned the what and the where, basically. But if I taught you the rule that words that end in ation in English are acción in Spanish, just with a Spanish accent, right? With the Spanish vowels. The words don't even fit in the screen, on the screen, right? Now you know 194 words in Spanish. Literally, you list them out, it's 194 words. And so would you rather learn one word or 194 words, right? So trying to skip grammar, specifically trying to skip the why behind grammar, is the mistake that I made in the beginning that led me to not making any progress. I spent almost a month or so, maybe 2 months, looking for different ways to learn Spanish, right? And eventually I found an app called Language Transfer, which is like this Audible course. And the main part of Language Transfer was they went through the why. And so going through this why was so crucial because here's a simple reason, okay? When you understand why certain things happen in Spanish, then it makes more sense. Very simple. And when it makes more sense, you remember it better. And this is where you use leverage, okay? Leverage is basically where the inputs that you put in, you get way more of the output, okay? Think about it like this, okay? Where here's where you are, and what happens is you get exponentially more growth on the other side because you have leverage here. Does that sort of make sense, okay? So think about it like this. The further this pole is here, the more leverage you have because it requires less movement here, but for more output here. Less input, but more output. You put in 1, you get 3. Do you get it? You basically have a multiplier on your learning. That's what leverage is. And when you understand the third W, the why, your leverage is so much higher because in this case, instead of learning one word, you learned 194 words. This is, by the way, what I teach in that free gift that I showed you in the description, okay? So to check that if you're interested. So the why behind Spanish is crucial because you basically, when you understand one concept in Spanish, it will unlock hundreds of different example sentences or example words. And this means that when we're learning grammar, you have leverage over what you learn, and therefore you unlock more Spanish. And this was crucial when I was learning Spanish. I did the 3 W's before the summer of 2022, and also I implemented the fluency equation. And by the end of it, I was conversationally fluent with only 120 hours of study. And like to show you how much time this saved me, this leverage saved me, according to an AI analysis of my transformation, that means I saved a minimum of 200 to 250 hours of studying compared to the average learner. If we put that at $9 an hour, that's literally $1,800 of like time that I spent minimum wage that I saved. My client Eduardo, he, using this method as well, he saved 200 to 350 hours compared to the average learner, which then saved him so much time of studying, okay? So leverage matters, okay? And when you skip grammar, you're skipping leverage. And so those are the 3 mistakes that, in my opinion, fixing these mistakes when speaking Spanish is super vital when it comes to speaking Spanish. If you want more videos like this, then comment that. And this is just a small piece from my program. And so if you want to implement these frameworks and finally start learning Spanish in a clear, structured way, then you can check the description to join my program. But act now because I don't know if the price may increase later. So if you want the cheaper price, then you can join now. Otherwise, grab my free, easy-to-use Cognate cheat sheet in the description to instantly unlock thousands of Spanish words. No email needed. You just get it. It's literally just yours instantly downloaded. I'm not going to take your email or anything. And finally, if not, I would really appreciate it if you shared the video with someone who'd benefit. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Stay humble.